This journalist believed he had the perfect argument, until Caroline Leavitt responded with a story that changed everything. The stage was set. Bright studio lights beamed down on the sleek, modern set of American Perspectives Tonight, a primetime show known for its intense political and cultural debates. At the heart of it all sat Caroline Leavitt, a rising political firebrand, her posture poised, her expression unwavering. Seated across from her was Alan Brooks, a veteran journalist with a reputation for being sharp, unfiltered, and relentless in his questioning. Millions tuned in. The anticipation was thick, not just in the studio, but across the nation. Though the debate had been framed as a discussion on leadership and policy, everyone knew it would spiral into something much bigger. Caroline had built her name on standing firm in her beliefs, never shying away from tough conversations. Alan, on the other hand, was notorious for pushing his guests into uncomfortable corners, exposing what he saw as weaknesses in their arguments. For the first 20 minutes, it was standard political back and forth, economic policies, government regulations, social issues. Caroline handled the rapid-fire questioning with confidence, delivering articulate, well-prepared responses. She wasn't just a politician, she was a skilled communicator, someone who understood how to connect beyond the walls of the studio. Then Alan shifted in his chair. His eyes narrowed slightly, a subtle movement, one only a seasoned debater would notice. He was preparing to shift gears. The energy in the room shifted with him, as if everyone, producers, cameramen, audience members, sensed that the conversation was about to take a turn. "Caroline," Alan began, his voice measured, "you often speak about your faith as a guiding principle in your leadership. You've even stated that faith has a role in shaping public policy." She nodded, waiting. "But let's be honest," he continued, leaning in. "Religion, Christianity in particular, is declining in this country. More people than ever reject belief in a higher power. Science has provided answers that religion never could. And yet, you continue to advocate for faith as if it's some universal truth. Why?" A murmur rippled through the audience. Caroline didn't react immediately. Instead, she let the question linger, absorbing the weight of it. Alan wasn't just challenging her personal beliefs, he was questioning the very relevance of faith itself. "I ask," he went on, "because millions of people in this country would argue that faith is nothing more than an outdated crutch, something that holds people back rather than moves them forward. Do you think that's fair? Or are you just unwilling to admit that faith is losing its place in modern America?" The room felt smaller. People shifted in their seats. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of expression. Alan had just tossed a match into a dry field. Now, everyone was waiting to see whether Caroline would let it burn, or extinguish it with something unexpected. But she didn't rush. Instead, she took a breath, tilted her head slightly, and allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile. She knew exactly what to say next. Alan leaned back, tapping his pen against the desk. He was waiting. The audience was waiting. The silence wasn't awkward, it was electric. "You say faith is an outdated crutch," she said, her voice steady, "that it holds people back. But let me ask you something, Alan." She tilted her head slightly. "When science doesn't have an answer, what do people turn to?" Alan's lips twitched, but he didn't interrupt. She continued. "It's easy to dismiss faith when life is comfortable, when your job is secure, when your family is healthy, when the world makes sense. But when the ground beneath you disappears, when your child is dying in a hospital bed, when you're staring at a casket, when doctors say there's nothing more they can do, what do you reach for then?" Silence. Even the producers, normally whispering behind the cameras, had gone still. Alan adjusted his tie, never breaking eye contact. "Caroline, people turn to faith because they're desperate. That doesn't make it real. It makes it comforting." She nodded slightly, as if expecting that response. "Comfort isn't a weakness," she countered. "It's human. And faith is more than just comfort. It's resilience. It's hope. It's the belief that, even in the darkest moments, there's still meaning. You can call that naive, but I'd argue it's the very thing that has kept people from collapsing under suffering for thousands of years." Alan exhaled through his nose, shifting in his chair. "So, You're saying belief is necessary for survival? I'm saying belief is what makes survival mean something, she replied. A faint smile flickered on Alan's lips as he shook his head. You're good, Caroline, but let's talk facts. He gestured slightly, resetting the conversation. Religious institutions have been responsible for some of history's worst atrocities: wars, oppression, corruption. And yet, you defend faith as if it's only ever been a force for good. Caroline's expression remained unchanged. I won't deny that people have done terrible things in the name of religion, she said. But let's be fair. Faith has also been the foundation for some of the greatest acts of courage, sacrifice, and kindness the world has ever seen. The abolition of slavery, the civil rights movement, the hospitals, schools, and charities built by people who believed their faith called them to serve others. You can't erase that just because some have twisted faith for their own agenda. Alan leaned back, studying her. He didn't have an immediate retort, and Caroline took the opportunity to lean in. But if you really want to know why I believe in faith, why I defend it, it's not because of history. It's not because of politics.
She paused.
It's because of a woman I met 12 years ago. A slight furrow formed between Alan's brows. A woman. Caroline nodded, her voice softening. Her name was Margaret, and she taught me something about faith that no debate could ever shake. But no one, not Alan, not the audience, was prepared for the story she was about to tell. She interlaced her fingers, resting them lightly on the table. Her gaze held steady as she began. 12 years ago, fresh out of college, I was working as a legislative assistant in Nashville. My days were packed with meetings, phone calls, drafting statements. Back then, I believed politics was the most powerful force in the world. And then, I met Margaret. Alan remained silent, his posture rigid. The audience leaned in, not because of theatrics, but because of something else. Something real. Margaret was 72 years old. I met her at a community outreach event, one of those initiatives politicians show up to for a quick photo op. But I wasn't there for that. I was just doing my job, taking notes, listening politely, then leaving. But Margaret, she stopped me in my tracks. Caroline exhaled slightly, as if the memory itself pressed against her. She had this presence about her. Not because she was loud or commanding, quite the opposite. She was soft-spoken. But when she talked, people listened. She carried herself with the kind of quiet strength that only comes from surviving what should have broken you. Alan wasn't looking at his notes anymore. He was listening. And what Caroline said next changed everything. From a debate, without feeling like I had the last word. I don't know if my mind has changed, but I know one thing. I'm still thinking about it. That was all he wrote. No defensiveness, no dismissal, just an admission that something had gotten through. And that single post sent the conversation into overdrive. People who had written him off as just another cynical journalist saw a side of him they hadn't expected. Some praised his honesty. Others accused him of wavering. But one thing was clear. Caroline's words had done something rare in modern debates. They had made someone stop and truly consider. By the end of the week, clips from the debate had amassed millions of views. Think pieces flooded the internet. Pastors and professors weighed in. Atheists and believers alike dissected every moment. And through it all, Caroline stayed mostly quiet, letting the conversation take on a life of its own. But in the middle of all the noise, she received a message, one that stood out from the rest. It was from Alan. Caroline, I still don't know where I stand on faith, but I'd like to hear more about Margaret. Caroline smiled as she read it, because she knew this wasn't about winning an argument. It was about opening a door. And sometimes that was enough.